Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to RPC Standard Call 9. I think the first thing we have on our agenda is the spell check decision discussion and the updates from Alcohol 3, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, so the the main update as far as the docs update is I'm kind of waiting on Light Client at this point. I know I mean all the code is done. It builds it it should deploy successfully with the CI. I've tested it on my fork and um I'm honestly not sure what he said he had some issue building it, but he hasn't replied back as to what that issue might be. So I can either confirm or deny that there is still an issue of any sort. But otherwise, as far as I know, I think Zane has reviewed the docs. I've looked
Can
at them.
see
Yeah, go ahead, Zane.
the light client to see if he still had an issue, but he said that he hadn't had a chance to look to see like
Okay,
if his issue's still there or not.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I have the CI set up so that it runs on all the currently active versions of Node. So if there was an issue building, it seems like CI would have caught it. Um, so as far as
Okay,
I know,
but you did mention about the spec check.
oh yes, okay. So that's a second. Yes, so that's kind of a whole second piece of work. Um, so I've been talking with Lightline about this off and on for the last 2 months, and at one point he thought there might be some issues with spec check not accurately or generating false positives where it was identifying false fields that shouldn't exist as being okay, or anyway, so some things he thought where the spec wasn't matching the test, and that he thought spec check was missing. We've gone back and looked at the the things he thought were issues, and they've turned out to not be, as far as we can tell. So spec check should work fine. The current broken test he has a fix for. There's a PR outstanding for it to fix the simulate V1 test that's currently that's causing the test to fail on the CI. So he just needs to merge that or get Felix or somebody else. Like obviously, I'm not a maintainer, so I can't merge or approve that. But that test should be fixed, and then I am working on an additional component, which is like it's essentially it does the same thing as spec check, but it allows spec check if you have a test with if you have a broken test or where a schema validation is failing, it'll generate a little URL to where you can run it'll throw it up in a browser window that will allow you to visualize both the schema and the test that's failing locally. And it's not 100% done. I still have to make some more tweaks to it. I need to talk to him about how he wants to deploy that in conjunction with spec check. But right now, the way it works is you run spec check. If a test fails, it will generate a URL for like this local kind of like schema viewer. And the schema viewer is just using it's doing spec validation as well. It's just using a JavaScript version of the same thing as what spec check does. And it just visualizes it, makes it easier to actually look at the schema that you're testing. So in this case, it might be like an individual RPC method, and then you can copy and paste in the data that from the test, and it will tell you what's failing, and then you can use that to kind of triage failing tests. So it's just like a nice DX improvement for people who are working on either creating new specs or fixing tests or adding tests or whatever it is. So um,
Okay, so if you don't mind, I have a question. Does it
mhm.
like interact with the RPC test gen repo?
It at the moment I just have an independent repo that I'm working on, but I need to ask Light Client how he wants to integrate the two, because he had suggested like there's all sorts of like JSON schema validators out there like this. I just use AI to create one. I've done some tweaking on it, but it's just the idea is it's just because spec check doesn't really produce nice output when you have schema failures or data validation failures. It's just to make it easier to figure out what's wrong when you have a schema. If your schema doesn't match the way that they're supposed to be formatted, or if the the actual JSON data in your test doesn't match the schema, this it just makes it a lot easier to triage that like in a kind of visually. If that makes sense. So it's an additional tool that you could use alongside either the either the execution APIs tests or just spec check generally.
Okay, so I dropped a link because before I realized that there was a spec check on the repo, I was trying to like work on this too. But then when I realized that we have something that fits more into this category, I had to pause. So is this something similar to what you're currently doing? Sorry for the noisy background. Just how the dog is barking. Sorry, did you hear me?
I can hear you. But Acolyte?
Okay. Acolyte, are you still here?
Yeah, Acolyte, we can't hear you. You're like muted or silent.
You're not muted, but you're not saying anything either. Or we can hear you if you're saying something. But I just wanted to ask, is the two you're working out something similar to this? I think the link I shared earlier. Okay. You can just try and drop out and then come back again to see if it works now.
Okay, one second, be right back.
Oh, yeah, it's working.
Your audio
Oh,
is
is it?
Come back.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Sorry. This network connectivity or something. So I haven't looked in detail at your project line. Sorry, I'm on mobile. My laptop is having connectivity issues for some reason. But it just from just briefly skimming your project plan, it looks similar. I mean, what I was building is really just it was really only supposed to be used in conjunction with spec test, and just when spec test fails, when a test fails or whatever, it would just allow you to visualize the error, where the error is in the particular schema you're validating against, since spec check CLI output is not very pleasing to the eye and requires some work to get to where it's actually comprehensible as to what's going on.
Yeah, and it's
So
kind of like hidden. It's hidden. You need to like call
yeah,
it before it actually comes
yeah,
out.
right. So this just extends what spec check does. So when a test fails, it generates a little local URL, and then if as long as you're running this little schema validator client that I built, it will populate it populates the schema and the data, and then highlights where the validation failures are. So it's it can be used on its own, but it's not, as I've currently built it, it's not a full schema. It doesn't take the entire OpenRPC document and then parse it. It's just taking the particular schema that you have an issue with, that's generated from spec check. Because spec check already does all the work already, and we don't have to, I don't, Light Client didn't feel like there, at least my impression was from our brief conversation, he didn't feel like there was a need to rebuild that entire thing since it already works. But here again, it's not rocket science. I mean, AI can do it in about 10 minutes, can get you a basic schema validation tool. So
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so I was just like sort of thinking about things, because at OpenRPC we'd started working on Golang tools to do sort of that same like validation. So when I took a look at spec check, in my opinion, the issue is like kind of twofold. So one, we have a PR out for a linter, and the linter is written in Golang. And the original ETH simulate v1 like errors are actually caused by like just a bad specification. I believe there's a field called calls, which is being required, but at the same time isn't defined or specified within properties. And that causes the CI to then just error, and then to figure out that that's the error in itself from the validation is incredibly difficult to read, like you all were saying. But that's something that like I think this linter project that we're working on would catch. So it's kind of interesting to think about this from that perspective. And then the other thing is that OpenRPC does have validation stuff So within the TypeScript ecosystem, there's schema utils, which I think is a lot better about telling you like where the error is. And then that would actually do like real validation. So one of the limitations with the schema validation as is that it doesn't necessarily always guarantee that the document itself is well formed. And then there's certain sort of rules around references and things like that. So part of our thinking is that on the roadmap for this upcoming year would be to move schema utils things into more native languages. And so that would allow the spec check to then use schema validation tools internally. So it would just be able to validate the document and then get back something nice. That's like the idea and the thinking. So it would be interesting to see what Light Clients thinks about that. And then the other thing is that looking at the spec in the current PR, there's a little bit of a questionable thing. So right now, technically, we've limited the scope of the spec to support JSON schema draft 7, but Light Clients PR actually shows for unevaluated properties, which is NSpec 2019-2020. So it's technically not supported, but kind of is supported by the underlying schema validation. So there could be some things there. And so it just kind of needs to be looked at. I'm getting ready to put in a comment on the PR. So that was a lot, and I kind of just jumped through some topics, but that's just kind of like my high level thinking. And like I 100% agree with both of you that like spec check needs um, just like a better way to inspect what's going wrong with it. And it would be interesting to think about sort of what that looks like from like desirability category. The other thing with spec check is that the parameters, there's like this kind of testing. So the other reason why ETH Simulate v1 is like I think broken is because when the test came in for the .io, there are also just standard JSON RPC error things like, oh, you didn't specify all of the parameters. So if someone sends in like empty parameters, you kind of want this negative test where like bad parameters returns back bad results. But the way that spec check does the like parameter validation is such that it will throw because the RPC request is not made correctly. So you kind of want to do two tests. You want to do one where it's, go ahead, Mercy.
So I also want us to like point out this general thought, because we know, we all have the idea that the RPC test gen affects whatever output it gets directly injected into execution spec. I think this is where the whole issue is coming from. We need to like find a way to make sure that whatever we're generating from the RPC test gen side does not negatively affect the execution API repo, because this is where the whole it simulates block states calls issue, array and object issue started from. We need to run some check that it will run correctly on both RPC tests and then run correctly on execution API tests. Not in the sense that if it passes, for example, the it simulates, it passed on RPC test, then there was an object array issue on execution API test. So I don't know where or how the whole thing is programmed, but it's also something we need to look into so that we don't create a test that passes in one end and then the other end it fails. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we get that for sure. That like essentially the validation RPC test gen, which I think is fine. I think the real problem was that the spec check worked as expected, but like I think the external pressure was that the developer that merged in the change like just needed to actually land the change, and then debugging the actual underlying issue was complicated and like just was like maybe just too difficult. The bar was too high to figure out why it didn't work in the other repo. But spec check did.
Sorry, I don't really think that was the case because they had two options. Is either they change the object to array, which Light Client already has done, or better still, they batch the calls because the whole issue was from the state, the block state calls. It was either because when I noticed the error, this was the two options that was very valuable at the point. Then in my mind, I was like changing the schema to accept an array would be like too extensive because I don't really know the idea of us having an object instead of an array, or in a case whereby we can just have the two in case of any of the tests we're carrying out requires either an object or an array, then it should pass. So it,
Actually,
it's
actually,
a problem that shouldn't have happened initially.
I looked at the code, and then I also looked at the spec, and the issue was like that the spec was malformed. So within the original PR that was merged with the broken code, the issue was that when the person went to write the ETH spec for the ETH v simulate, they had a required field for calls, but then they didn't actually add calls to the properties of the object, which is actually broken. So spec check threw an error that said that um, like the type was invalid. And then so that's like the error that like got thrown up. And if you just add calls to properties on the object that's being specified in the original EV1, it like fixes that error. The second issue was that um, they wanted to do a negative test, the person who made the call, and the problem with spec check is that negative tests are not supported. So spec check will throw an error if you give it bad params. So when the test was generated, the RPC test gen generates the proper .io file, which is like throw back a negative 3200 error code, and that gets stored in the .io, right? So then that .io gets copied into the ETH spec repo, and then when spec check tries to run, it won't run because the request that is being requested to generate is invalid by JSON schema validation. So the spec check schema validation prevents that from passing. So there are three errors in the spec that are very preventable that spec check actually caught and catches all three once you resolve each error. But the problem was is that all three of those were ignored because it's difficult to debug. And like as the person who like, wrote the open RPC call, I am very, very confident that like that was the issue. And I actually fixed it in a local build. So I can always like share
Yeah,
that if that makes
we
sense.
we're just saying the same thing. That's what I was saying, that we need to like build a plan that we don't like, for example, what you just said, the test passed, the whole thing passed on RPC, it generated a negative call. Then looking at the execution API side, it doesn't accept negatives. So we need to like make a plan that in case you're writing a test that will generate a negative call, it should flag to you so that you will know, as in you have like that first-hand information that okay, this is not going to work here because whatever you generate here is going to be injected to this side.
Yeah.
So it kind of like saves time. It's a misunderstanding clearly because I don't think they actually know that we don't generate negative calls.
Yeah, I think that that's a
It,
bug with spec check actually. So like spec check
it's,
itself should support being able to turn off
yes.
parameter validation, because there are cases like when you're writing the test itself, you want to make sure that you're calling the right thing according to the spec. And then there's a chance that you want to turn it off as well, because you can't just like pass, because you want negative validation test. So like basically spec check needs an arg that changes the invalid params to warn. So that way NCI, when you're doing this test, it works. When you're doing your local development, you know that you're testing the thing that you wanted to test. And you have like both sets of information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So I also have some little updates on excuse me. Hillary had a PR up. So we talked about how it's going to get merged after Lifeline's PR gets in eventually. And I don't know if we have any other things to discuss. Acolytes, do you have?
Nothing else for me, except I'm very interested to hear what Zane's doing as far as schema validation goes. It's kind of more visual because like that's just a super helpful thing with spec check if we did. And I think what's hard is like we don't have any decision makers here, and this is just
Yeah.
like the same
Yeah.
it's the
We
same
just
same song every 2 weeks. And
every few weeks, and we actually need to like get it done and then move forward from here because this is like an endless circle it has
yeah,
turned into.
yeah. I mean, we
We
just
need
Yeah.
need
to get
a
a merge and
we need a maintainer for the execution APIs, and it's not going to be me because I'm not going to be I don't work for the foundation, so um, but
Yeah,
y'all
that's
collectively need somebody who can like maintain this stuff, who's willing to like come to these calls and help, who's actually interested
yeah,
in this because there's a lot to do. It's just not done.
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I need to talk to Light Client. I'm Carrie. I work for the Steel team, and I've been with the foundation for a long time. But yeah, it's the plan to have, I think, someone from the Steel team step in, and
Okay.
I think that's going to be me. I just need to talk to Light Client about getting
okay, I was actually
Cool.
volunteering
ramped
to
up.
do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Well,
We're interested in supporting. So
I was
cool.
actually volunteering to do that, but no problem.
Awesome. Yeah, either way.
okay. That's good to know. Carrie, I don't know if you can DM me on the via the ETH R&D Discord,
Sure.
same username with like me and maybe like Justin Florentine and Likeline, just so I can connect with you because I'm just curious to like understand like who's doing what because I have some other questions related to a grant I'm doing for some of this work. So if you're
Cool.
actively engaged, Likeline just is busy. So
Yes. Yep. Totally. Yeah. And I should be able to
okay, cool,
attend the calls and stuff from here on out. So,
cool, great.
yep.
Okay, thank you. But do you have any other things to tell us? Then we can wrap up on then. Hello, Clary.
Wait, I didn't. Who were you talking to, Mercy? Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Clary.
Oh, Carrie.
I'm
Um,
Scottish.
what did you need?
Yeah. I was asking, do you have any other information or how we can go up from here since you're the one pioneering this now?
No, I mean, it sounds like the biggest things that we need right now are just merge access,
Yeah.
and like the ability to review. But is that different, or what are the biggest things that we are blocked on or need help with right now?
That should be the PRs we have up and then the Docosaurus website upgrade.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, I'll plan to talk to Light Client this week and just get kind of more up to speed on that front.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Acolyte, I don't know if you have some time, you can if you can give me a feedback on the link I shared earlier. I don't know if you still have the link.
If you'll drop it in the ETH, I'm getting ready. I have to actually drop off here in just a minute. If you can just drop it in our RPC channel and ETH R&D, I'll take a look again and I'll post my repo that I'd started working on to kind of extend spec check, and maybe we can collaborate there some.
Okay, all right. I think, is there any other thing we want to discuss or something I'm missing? Okay, guess that's all for today. All right. Thank you very much for joining today's call and for your input. See you guys next 2 weeks. Yeah.